All right, so for this video, we'll be taking the same website we built last week, and we'll be adding some more visual style to it. We'll be learning a few new things, not like a ton, but we will be learning about how to add images and maybe even a little bit of animation. So we're still not getting into advanced CSS where we're talking about layouts and things like that. This is still mostly like a one-page kind of deal, but we're going to make it look better than it does right now. So to get us started, I'm just going to open my folder. Same folder as last week. Up in my code editor, we're going to drag it in there. And let's pull that up. So I'm going to pull these up next to each other so I can see both at the same time. Now, one thing I noticed after doing last week's video is that we did not position this footer properly. Notice how it's kind of stuck over there on the left and it's not centered with the rest of the stuff. Well, let's just go ahead and fix that before we get to new stuff. So if you remember from last week, the way that we centered this whole element here, if you look at our HTML, is we wrapped it in this main tag. And then footer is outside of that, so it's not part of the main tag. And so it's not getting that styling. So what we need to do is we need to add footer to this CSS selector. And the cool thing is you can just do that right inline here, just comma footer. That means now these rules apply both to footer and to main. So let's see what that did for us. And sure enough, it is aligned now. We probably still want this in the center though. That's kind of the convention for footers. So let's make its own rule down here for just footer. And text align center. And that should do it for us. Yeah, there we go. All right, so now let's think about what we want to do for styles. I think one of the obvious initial things is fonts. So let's talk about that. I would recommend using a service like Google Fonts to start out with this. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. And I've actually already selected the fonts I want to use. Since I am more of like a developer designer, I tend to want to choose kind of nerdier looking fonts maybe. And so that's what I went with, Source Code Pro. And on Google Fonts, you can just kind of browse around. Let me just show you. Like all the different, I got it filtered by monospace, but you can filter by whatever and then select the fonts you want. And then that will give you the code to put on your site. So I've selected two weights of the same font. So regular 400 and black 900 of Source Code Pro. And then if I go to this embed tab here, then it gives me the HTML, the link. And if you read the instructions to embed a font, copy the code into the head of your HTML. So that's what we're going to do. HTML in the head section right here. Blow that up a bit. And I'm going to copy this link. Looks like I had already done it before, but I'll delete that. And we're going to paste it right in here. And let's indent that here. Okay. So now we've got the font linked. Now it doesn't do anything by default because we actually have to tell our styles to use that font. And so it gives us the code for that too. It says CSS rules to specify families. And so font family, Source Code Pro, and monospace as a fallback. So we're up in here in our HTML where we had set sans serif. I'm just going to paste that in. And now everything will be Source Code Pro. And so yeah, there it is. Now, one thing you'll notice about this though is that I'm not using my 900 weight. So I had selected two weights, regular 400, which is what everything is showing, and then black 900. So we need to tell it to use our 900 weight on our headlines. And so our headlines, if you remember, are H1, high mark right here at the top, and H2s for select work and for links right here. So those are our headlines, and we want those to be the bold weight. So I'm going to make a new rule down here, H1, H2. You could just throw an H3 in there too in case you wanted to use an H3 later. And I'm going to do font weight 900. So that'll make it use our heavy font weight properly. And did it do it? Yeah, I think it did. So yeah, it's black 900. And yeah, that should take care of it on the font side. So let's talk about colors. Since I am going for that kind of more Cody looking thing, I think I'm going to go with a dark mode. Now you can do whatever colors you would like here. And the technique I'm teaching you to do this with would apply no matter what kind of color scheme you want. And there's a cool thing in CSS that we haven't really talked about yet, but it's called CSS variables. And it lets you kind of define variables, which are things that you can use in your code as many times as you want. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But we're going to be using CSS variables for our color scheme. And we'll put those right up at the top. And let me I've got some pre-written, and I'm just going to paste them in, then we'll talk about what we've got. So the way CSS variables work is you have this root element here. You don't need to worry too much about what this means right now. But this is basically just saying globally, I want to have these variables. And so a variable in CSS has this dash dash thing in front of it. And then the name after it is whatever you want, as long as it doesn't have spaces or something. So I could call this like foo. But just name it something meaningful. And then the variables can store any kind of value that a CSS attribute can store. So like a 16px would be valid. This string would be valid. Basically anything that you can write in a CSS attribute could be stored in a variable. So I'm saying foreground color is white. The background color is this kind of blue color, or I mean this dark color. And then the link color is this teal. And again, you can customize this however you want. In fact, that's part of the project, is actually just making these your own. But I'll show you how to use these. So again, these don't do anything by default. I'm just defining them. But now I can say, okay, well, let's use this BG variable to set the background color of the entire page. So background color, and then var, and then dash dash BG color. So the name of the variable. And so the key thing to do here is this var and then parentheses. That tells CSS, okay, I'm using a variable here. And basically what happens is when I put BG color in here, it just takes the value of that, which is this hex code, and then uses that for this attribute. So let me refresh, and yeah, sure enough, we got the dark background. Now clearly we need to get the foreground color correct. So I've got another variable for that. I'm just going to duplicate that line, Command-Shift-D, and then we're going to set color, which is the text color of the page, to FG color. So variable again, and then refresh, and yeah, there it goes. Now you can see my links are not the right color. I think we had some link styling in here that we need to replace as well. So I do have another link color variable, and you can add as many of these variables as you want. But what I would recommend doing is just paying attention to variables that you might need to use in multiple points of your code. And that's where variables are really nice, because you can just change them up here, and then anywhere that uses the variables in your CSS will get updated automatically. So we need to set the color of our link to link color, and right now we're setting it to black. So let's just do var again, and link color, and let's refresh. There it is. Okay, it's still doing that weird blue hover thing. That's down here. We're just going to delete this for now. We might decide to add something back there later, but for now, delete it, and yeah. So I've got a basic color scheme working, which is cool. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, sometimes it's a little bit harsh to have like white on like a straight up darker background. And one trick I like to do to make it look a little bit more nuanced is to do RGBA for the color. So I'm changing the foreground color here. And the way RGBA syntax works is you get red, green, blue, alpha. And so you just pass those into this parentheses as, let's say, 255, 255, 255 is white. And then I can pass the fourth value, this is why I'm using RGBA, as the opacity. And so let's do 0.8. So mostly opaque, but a little bit transparent. And so you can see that's very subtle. I'm not sure if you can even see it on your screen, but it kind of blends with the background a bit more when you do it that way. So that's just like a very minor aesthetic thing. All right, so we need to add an image. So it'd be nice to have like an avatar or like a profile image of something, since this is a personal website. And I happen to have one of those. So let me grab it real quick. Let's see. And we don't have a place for images in our project right now. But what I like to do when I start adding images in is to make an images folder. So you could do that here with new folder, or right click, new folder, and I'll call it images. And let's just open this up in our Finder, and I'm going to move my image into it. So reveal in Finder, right there it is. And I'm going to paste my image, which is a SVG image. We'll talk more about images later, but it is important to be careful about what kind of images you use on the web. An SVG is a vector image. So for things like icons or drawings or illustrations, SVG is really nice because you don't have to worry about scaling it. You can show it at any size and it will render perfectly Also screen density. So if you're showing like a JPEG image, for instance, if it's too small, it's going to look blurry on a high resolution screen, like an iPhone or an iPad, or even any modern smartphone really has a high density screen. But SVGs, you don't have to worry about that, which is part of why I'm using it here. And let's just go ahead and add this right up at the top. So in our HTML, I'm going to use an image tag. So right before this hi, I mark image source, and this is where I'm telling it where to look for the image. And if you remember the way we did source here, it's called href up with link, but styles.css. It's a similar idea here where we're giving it the path to where this image is. In this case, I put my image in this images folder. So we need to tell it that images slash, and so slash means go into the folder and then the name of the image. And image doesn't have a closing tag. It doesn't go like this because there's nothing inside of an image. An image is an image. So that's one of those tags that doesn't have anything in between it because it's taken care of by the attribute. So let's add that here, and then let's make sure it's showing up. Okay, it is showing up, and it's way too big. That's a bit scary. I don't think I need my face that big on the screen. So we need to style this clearly. And this is going to introduce another concept. While I could write in the style here, like the width of this image, it's best to actually keep any visual display stuff in your CSS file. So to give myself a way to style this more easily, like I could write a rule in here like, image width 80 pixels or something. And that would work because this is the only image on my page. But what if I added other images? Say I wanted to add images down here for my portfolio. Well, they would all be set to 80 pixels because I made a rule for that. So I don't want to be like generalizing that much with that tag. And so what we need to do is I'm going to add this special attribute called class, and you'll see a lot more of this later, that I can give this a name that I can style with. So I'm going to say avatar. So image class equals avatar. And what this does, it doesn't do anything functionally on the HTML side, but in my CSS, it gives me a way to style that specific element. So the way you do that in CSS is you type a dot and then the class name. So in this case, avatar. So if I had called that, let's say instead I had called that me, then I would write .me over here. And that would work. So I've still got that 80 pixels width. Now you'll notice my SVG is using black line, so I need to put a background on this so that you can actually see it correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and add a height to this as well. And then a background color. Just white. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, now it's in a square. It looks best if avatars are rounded, I think. So I'm going to do border radius and then 50%. So border radius 50% is a trick to get a circle, basically. And then what I'm going to do, like you can see that the illustration is kind of bleeding right up against the edge. So I need to add some padding in there. So padding is space inside of an element. So let's do padding. And maybe like, I don't know, let's try 4 pixels. And yeah, that works pretty well. So that looks a bit more like a normal avatar. Now, so we've got an image on our page. It's an SVG. It'll work at any screen resolution. When it comes to images that are like photography or like JPEGs or PNG type art, you do need to be careful about sizing. So making sure that the size, like say you have an image that you want to show as a square, like 250 pixels by 250 pixels. Well, you'll want, if you're showing it at that size, you're going to want to double the size in reality. So you would actually have a 500 pixel by 500 pixel image so that it can render on a higher density screen. We'll talk more about that later. And that's where it is important to know that you can't just drop images from your camera roll, for instance, onto your website because they're going to be way too big, but you also can't necessarily just like shrink things in Photoshop and then expect it to work correctly on all screens. You have to think about the screen density. So that's like a tutorial for a later time, but I did want to mention it now just in case some of you are not using SVGs here. You do need to think about the size of the image that you're using. All right, so I mean, this is already looking a good bit better, looking a bit more like a real website. And I thought it might be fun, even though it's not really necessary, just to add some slight animation to this page when it initially loads. So I'm going to show you a way to do that with CSS. And CSS actually has a lot of powerful animation tools. We're going to be using one in particular called keyframes. I'm going to put these up with the variables right here at the top. And I just pasted it in. So what we have here is this at keyframes, and this lets me specify different states of an element. So it doesn't really matter what this applies to yet. I'm just giving this animation a name, which in this case is slide up in. And then I'm saying at 0%, like when it first starts, at the beginning of the time, whenever you're applying this, then I'm going to transform it and I'm going to translate the Y position by 10 pixels. So I'm bumping it down. I'm bumping anything that this is applied to down 10 pixels. And I'm also setting the opacity to 0.5, which is like halfway opaque. And then at 100%, so when the animation is finished, I'm setting the translate to 0, which means, okay, we're not shifting it. Actually, that should be translate Y. We're not shifting it down anymore 10 pixels. It's going to be at 0. And then the opacity is 1, so fully opaque, just like it would usually be. And that may not make a whole lot of sense yet, but let's go ahead and apply it to something, and then we'll see what happens. So just to start off with, let's apply it to our avatar, just to like test it out. So animation, and oh boy, let's try to remember the syntax for this. Yeah, the first thing is that how many seconds should it take? Let's just do 1 second. And then what's the easing pattern? Easing is just kind of like how the transition extrapolates over time. And then let's see, what else is it? 0 second, 1 slide. Oh, wait, actually, let's just try. I think we can just do it like this. Let me see. So 1 second, slide up in. Whoops, I spelled that wrong. Slide up in as our animation, and let's see what that does. Refresh. Yeah, you can see that. So I'm going to do it again. Watch this avatar. See how it jumps there? Now, it's applying this animation to this element on the initial transition. So we could mess with this. Let's say, just to make it more obvious, like let's say we want to bump it 100 pixels down when it starts and make the opacity 0. So it's going to look a little silly, but see how it kind of, it's like a rising sun animation now. But you can kind of mess with these values. So what I'm doing here is that, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense just to animate this element in this case. I just want to apply this image to anything that's in kind of like our main copy, our text section. So the way we can do that is I'm going to move this animation attribute out of here, and I'm going to make a new rule, body, and then asterisk, and then I'm going to set the animation there. Okay, so what does this mean? This basically just means, well, actually, let me put an arrow in there too. Okay, so it means any tag. So asterisk is a wildcard. It just says select any tag that is directly inside of body. So that's what this arrow is. So you start with body, and then we drill in anything that's directly inside of the body tag, which if you look at our code is, this and this. So that'll be main in the footer. It's going to apply that animation too. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah, we get that. Okay, well, I think we can make it more interesting if maybe not anything that's directly inside, maybe just anything that's inside the body tag. So now it applies to main, image, h1, p tag, h2, ul, you get the idea. So let's try that. And yeah, that's a little bit more interesting. Notice how the bullets come up a little bit slower, or at a different x-axis or y-axis. So that makes it a little bit more visually interesting. So, I mean, you could do a lot with animation. I think one of the examples we looked at before had it so when it was animating, kind of staggering things in. We're not going to take the time to spend too much on that, but we'll have more animation later. But I think this is a good start. And actually, I did miss one thing that I need the demo, and that is on the image tag itself. One thing that's important to do, since this is an image, when a search engine is looking at this page, or more importantly, when a screen reader, which is what people with vision impairment use to browse the internet, is looking at this page, they don't know what is in this image unless you give them a description of it. So it's very important that you put an alt tag here. So alt equals, and then a description of what that image is. So like as if you're describing it to somebody, because that's the purpose of it. I would say an avatar of Mark Johnson, or maybe an illustrated. So just describe what the image is. It doesn't do anything visually on the page, but that's very important for screen readers, and also search engines to have more information about what an image on a page actually is. All right, and so when you're done with this, you've got your code updated. To update your Netlify site, actually, let's just go ahead and do it. Let me log into Netlify. Oh, and I am on the wrong account. Let's sign in with the right. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so log in. And it looks like I didn't actually update the previous version of this, but let's say this was my markjohnson.me site, my cool website demo here, and I need to update that with the latest code. Well, what I would do is I go to deploys and then see this drag and drop area here. I would just drag this whole folder, so not just the files, but like the whole folder here into this, and then it'll upload. So upload, published, let's look at it. And there it is, cool. It's online. So that is it. And stay tuned. Next time we'll be working a bit more on some more complex layouts. So things like image grids or menu bars and that kind of stuff.